Hello! Remember, if you are watching this at home, feel free to pause the video and write down any notes that you need to take so that you can best understand. And feel free to watch this video again until you understand what we're doing here. So today we're going to be factoring by grouping. And when we factor by grouping, we're factoring a 4-term polynomial. So there are 4 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of 3 terms. So when we factor by grouping, the first thing that we do is group up the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. And then we ask ourselves, well, what is the greatest common factor, or the largest number that you can divide out of both of the first 2 terms? In this case, it would be 2. So I put a 2 outside the parentheses, and then I see what's left. Now, when I factor out a 2, I also want to look and see, is there a number of x's that I can factor out as well? Well, in this case, this x has 2 x's, and this one has 3, so I can factor 2 x's out of both of them and still be okay. So I can put x squared there. And then I factor, and I divide. 12 divided by 2 is 6, and I divided out 2 x's, and I'm left with 1 x, plus 10 divided by 2 is 5, and I took out 2 x's, so I'm left with no x's. So this is the first group factored. Then I go to my second group, and I say, okay, what's the greatest common factor here? Well, since they're both negative, I know I can factor out a negative number, and in this case, the greatest common factor between 36 and 30 is 6. And since this has an x, but this one doesn't, I'm not going to factor out any x's. I'm just going to factor out negative 6. So again, when I factor, I divide. Negative 36 divided by negative 6 is positive 6, and the x is left still. Negative 30 divided by negative 6 is positive 5. Now, I look and see, as you can see here, after I've factored, I can see that my leftovers, what's left in the parentheses, is exactly the same. And that means I know I did it right. So my last step, which is super easy, is to regroup what's going on here. So I'm going to rewrite the 2x squared and this negative 6 together in one group. Like so. And then I'm going to write my leftovers. And since they're the same, I only have to write it once. So I've got my greatest common factor group and my leftover group. And this right here is my final answer. Let's try one more example. In this example, we've got 2x cubed plus x squared minus 14x minus 7. Again, our first step is to group up the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Then I can go ahead and see what the greatest common factor between 2x cubed and, well, what's the number in front of this x squared? 1? So what's the greatest common factor that goes into both 2 and 1? In this case, it's 1. And since this has 2 x's and this one has 3, I can take 2 out safely from each one, x squared. And then we like to see what's left. Well, I divide. 2 divided by 1 is 2. I took 2 x's out, I'm left with 1, plus 1 divided by 1 is 1. I took 2 x's out, and I'm not left with any. Then I go over here and find the greatest common factor here. Well, since they're both negative, I am going to factor out a negative number, and the greatest common factor between 14 and 7 is 7. So what I'm left with, well, I divide. Negative 14 divided by negative 7 is positive 2, and the x. Negative 7 divided by negative 7 is positive 1. And then I can see that my leftovers are exactly the same, So I know I did it right. That's the key. As long as the leftovers are the same, you know you did it right. Finally, we regroup with our greatest common factor group and my leftovers. So my greatest common factor group is 1x squared and -7. My leftover group is 2x plus 1. That is my final answer. Again, feel free to watch the video a second time if you need to understand better, and good luck.